President, we have a national emergency.
This is one of the things that we can shoot first and ask questions later. Normally you can't do that.
All of a sudden these trees started moving out of the way. They parted for me. And then I came out into this opening, and there where I saw Jesus Christ.
Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. He is more imminent.
James Madison, in 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations."
When men were free.
Broadcasting live from a secret location buried deep below the earth. You're about to make a connection to the signs of the times. W. Dean Shook is live on the air right now.
Welcome to End Time News. Thank you for being here. I'm your humbled host, W. Dean Shook, and I'm proud and privileged to be able to come to you and to have you tune into the program. You listeners are so important. I just can't say thank you enough. And before we start our program today, let me remind you, you can download the mobile app for your iPhone or Android, available on Google Play and the iStore. Download today and never miss another episode of End Time News. How was that, huh? Yeah. Well, we're going to have a lively discussion today about Islam declaring that we are in the last days, according to their prophecy. But before we do that, we're going to start with the news of the day, because there's some stuff here that you need to know. And here's one that caught my eye, just because it made me smile. When we talk about the mainstream media and politics, this is so true. I just couldn't wipe the smile off of my face. Let me tell you what this says. Ted Cruz channels Ronald Reagan, and the media goes bonkers. Out of Washington, in the eyes of the political and media elite, presidential candidate Ted Cruz is far too extreme ideologically to win any nomination, doesn't have enough support from the party bigwigs, is hated by almost everyone, and no one trusts him. He uses distortive, misleading rhetoric. He's venal, self-obsessed, says crazy things. He's not actually very smart, and he's everything that's wrong with modern politics. Now, in the eyes of the political and media elite, Ronald Reagan was too extreme and too simple to win the presidential nomination. They said he's a potential disaster for the GOP in the general election, an amiable dunce who was shockingly dumb and cruel, an evil man with no care, no concern for working-class Americans and future generations. He's cold and mean, with ice water for blood, and an egotistical bore who had no friends, only cronies. You see any resemblance there? While Senator Ted Cruz hasn't been popular with either establishment Washington or the establishment media ever since his election in the Senate in 2012, but reaction to his announcement last week that he's running for president appears to have put the criticism into overdrive. No Republican, arguably, has received such intense condemnation since Reagan. Political scientists argue the single most important determination of the outcome of the nomination is support from party elites, whose operatives can stave off a winning campaign. They're the donors that fund it, the elected officials and interest group leaders who bestow the credibility necessary to persuade voters and affect media coverage. Cruz has argued the most important factor is actually votes, not support from party elite. Now, I'm going to post this story on the website after the program, and there's a whole list of comparisons that are actually pretty funny. I would encourage you to go read them at wdeanshook.com. They'll be on the website later today. And reported by Breitbart News, who's saying Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid explains his shocking decision to not seek re-election and retire when his term ends in 2016 by telling the New York Times He was worried his race would consume campaign money that would be needed in other competitive states as Democrats try to regain control of the Senate. He said, "I think it's unfair for me to be soaking up all the money to be reelected with what we're going through in Maryland and Pennsylvania, Missouri, and Florida. But the real reason that Reid is retiring may have nothing to do with any of these excuses and everything to do with his concerns that a possible Republican president in 2016 would lead to the appointment of a Republican attorney general in 2017, because a Republican attorney general would almost certain to initiate a criminal investigation into Reid's abuse of political power in a brazen intervention in the Department of Homeland Security's issuance of the EB-5 visas to investors in a Las Vegas casino and hotel that was represented by his son, Rory Reid, and was highlighted in a report released by the Inspector General of DHS last week. Attorney Genova says, "I think Harry Reid's getting out of town ahead of the posse." Well, on Thursday, the nonprofit group Cause of Action called on the Department of Justice to launch a criminal investigation into Reid, citing the Pacific federal statutes that were violated. The group said Reid participated in unlawful political activity, possible coercion, and fraud related to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services EB-5 Immigration Investor Program. Then there's Reid's complacency with Senator Robert Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, and his abuse of his political office by intervening in an ongoing Department of Health and Human Services judiciary process involving $8.9 million in Medicare overbilling by his friend and campaign donor, Dr. Solomon Melgen. Reid hosted a meeting between Senator Menendez and Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius. At the meeting, Menendez made the case for his friend and donor, Dr. Solomon Melgen, who was at the time embroiled in what was supposed to be an independent judiciary process at HHS involving this $8.9 million overbilling Medicare. Reid's intervention came immediately after Melgen donated $300,000 to Senate Majority PAC and Super PAC that has close ties to Reid. At the end of 2012, Melgen's donations to the Senate Majority PAC totaled $700,000. Now, for his part in the intervention, Senator Menendez has been subject to an ongoing criminal investigation by the DOJ. But if a Republican's elected in 2016, there's going to be a new sheriff in town. And Harry Reid knows the posse assembled by this newly appointed Attorney General is unlikely to consider Reid's critics at DHS to be whiners. In fact, they're likely to be part of the posse. Oh, dirty Harry. And I have a report from Al Jazeera that I think is important. Iranian-backed militants are setting up missile sites at Yemen University. This reported by Al Jazeera. Southi Shiite militants are setting up an anti-aircraft batteries at a Yemen university, seemingly using the Educational Institute to provide civilian cover against this ongoing Saudi-led air campaign against the Iranian-backed fighters. Saudi Brigadier General Asiri told reporters yesterday the Houthis were utilizing the inhumane guerrilla tactics in order to keep their hold on power. The Houthis are using residential houses as hideouts and stores for their equipment, sometimes installing anti-aircraft equipment on top of civilian buildings to attract the alliance to bombard them and commit killing of innocents. Some observers have noted that the Houthis are adopting tactics that are akin to this Iranian-backed Palestinian terror group Hamas, which utilized UN buildings and residential areas to launch missile strikes against Israel last summer. During that Israel-Hamas war, the Gaza ruling terror group also used civilians as human shields so they could launch attacks under protected conditions. Houthi officials said if Saudi Arabia continues its aggression against the oppressed Yemen people, fighters will pave the way for the Saudis' regime destruction by conducting martyrdom-seeking operations inside Saudi Arabia in the coming hours. This according to a top Houthi official who told Iran's state-run Fars news agency. Arab leaders have pledged that the ongoing air campaign against the Houthis will continue until the Iranian-backed group withdraws or surrenders, as the Middle East continues to burn. And CBS Las Vegas. Now, I'm reporting this story because this has a message in it that's probably not intended. CBS Las Vegas, Republican lawmakers raising eyebrows after proposing church attendance should be mandatory. Arizona State Senator Sylvia Allen made the comments during a committee meeting with lawmakers. The meeting was concerning a gun bill and concealed weapons permit. This was reported by KPHO. Allen said, "I believe what's happening to our country is there's a moral erosion of the soul of America." Allen said more people may feel the need to carry weapons if moral rebirth doesn't occur in America. It's the soul that's corrupt. How we get back to a moral rebirth, I don't know. Since we're slowly eroding religion at every opportunity that we have, probably we should be debating a bill requiring every American to attend a church of their choice on Sundays to see if we can get back to having a moral rebirth, she continued to tell the committee. But since that would not be allowed and we would not even be debating that, I'm going to vote yes, that the people who are responsible, who have a concealed carry permit, won't have to worry about their guns as they're out and about doing their business in whatever building they're in, except the ones that guns are not allowed. Well, Democratic Steve Farley attended the meeting. He posted Allen's comments on social media. Farley also mentioned that Allen's idea goes against the Constitution. Said, even if you believe that would stem the moral decay, I think the Constitution makes it very clear that our country is founded on the pillars of separation of church and state, Farley said. Now, while I'm sure that CBS thinks it's exposing a whack job Republican, what they're really doing is exposing the real meaning of the separation of church and state. That the state cannot impose a state-sanctioned church or force people to attend. That's the real separation of church and state. And amongst this deal with Iran, here's a story that I thought was pretty interesting. This according to the Daily Beast. They're asking, does Iran have secret nukes in North Korea? It seems in October of 2012, Iran began stationing personnel at a military base in North Korea. It's in a mountainous area close to the Chinese border. If Iranians from the Minister of Defense and associated firms reportedly are working on both missiles and nuclear weapons. Ahmed Vahidi, Tehran's Minister of Defense at the time, denied sending people to North Korea, but the unconfirmed dispatch makes sense in light of the two states announcing a technical cooperation pact. Well, the P5+1 Security Council appears determined, before their self-imposed March 31st deadline, to ink a deal with Iran regarding its nuclear energy program, which is surely a cover for a wide-ranging weapons effort, once the preliminary agreement, referred to as a framework agreement, to ensure that the country remains at least 1 year from being able to produce an atomic device. The P5+1 negotiators believe they can do that by monitoring Tehran's centrifuges and thereby keep track of its total stock of fissile material. But no inspections of Iranian sites will solve a fundamental issue, as can be seen from the North Korean base housing Tehran's weapons specialists. Iran is only one part of a nuclear weapons effort spanning the Asian continent. North Korea, now the world's proliferation superstar, is a participant. China, who was once the mastermind, may still be a co-conspirator. Inspectors inside the borders of Iran, therefore, will not give the international community the assurances it needs. The cross-border nuclear trade is substantial enough to be called a program. Larry Kinch of the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Washington, D.C., estimated that the North's proceedings from this trade with Iran between $1.5 billion and $2 billion annually. A portion of this amount is related to missile and miscellaneous items. The rest derived from building Tehran's nuclear capabilities. The North Koreans have also sold Iran material for bomb cores, perhaps even weapons-grade uranium. The Telegraph reported, in 2002, a barrel of North Korean uranium cracked open and contaminated the tarmac of the new Tehran airport. In addition, the Kim Jong-un regime appears to have helped the Islamic Republic on its other pathways to the bomb. In 2013, Mir Dagan, a former Mossad director, charged the North with providing assistance to Iran's plutonium reactor. Maybe this is why Iran only considers these negotiations as a means to lift the sanctions, because no matter what their program will continue one way or the other. And what other weapons does the Iranian regime have? Well, according to the Jerusalem Post, Hezbollah has range of surface-to-sea missiles that can be used as surface-to-surface missiles to hit as far as Tel Aviv. Advanced weaponry, much of it supplied by Iran, is flowing into Syria and Lebanon, according to a senior Israeli naval source. The Navy is spending a large chunk of its operation time dealing with advanced weapons smuggling, according to the source, who said such weapons pose a challenge to all Western areas. He said the Northern Front has become unified, that Lebanon and Syria cannot be viewed as separate entities anymore. What happens in Syria happens in Lebanon in terms of weapons availability, and vice versa. He said, I'll go one step further and say that everything that happens in Iran can end up in Syria, which can then end up in Lebanon. In the event of a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, he said, I'm not sure Syria will remain on the sidelines. Hezbollah assists the Assad regime, and the help is mutual. Now, describing the quantity and quality of surface-to-air missiles in Hezbollah's possession, it's described as unprecedented. The source said there are dozens of such weapons in its keeping, covering around 10 different kinds of these missiles. The types of warhead and their range are many, said the source. A completely different situation. This sector has changed. The source said he assumed Hezbollah's imposition of the Yakhont guided anti-missile system, adding that the Navy is capable of defending itself from it, and it continues to develop its own weapons, copying the arms of other states, and it smuggles them to its allies and proxies in Syria and Lebanon. Well, I'm going to take a short break here, try to pay some bills. When I come back, we're going to talk about a new law in Oregon that's really not very surprising to me. We're also going to talk about a global slaughter of Christians and how the mainstream media is so silent on this. We're going to cover that, and we're going to cover Islam, calling this the last days according to their prophecy. When I return right after this short message, you're listening to End Time News.
End Time Prophecy News is the only program on the air that runs on recycled chickweed ethanol, working to save the planet every day.
Hi folks, have you noticed the federal government and police departments are using drones for everything? Drones are expensive. They're hard to fly. It can take up to a week just to learn to make a drone hover. Not anymore. There's a new generation of drones that are not only affordable but very easy to fly. Now you can have your own personal drone, anything from a micro mini that'll fit in the palm of your hand, right up to a full-scale model, 10 inches in diameter like the model I have, the V949 Pro. Comes with a 6-axis 4-rotor blade and an HD 2.4 camera mounted on the bottom. These drones are made of a space-age polymer. They're durable, and don't worry about crashing your drone. Replacement blades for this drone from the website are only $1.80 for a pack of 4. That's right, I said $1.80 for a pack of 4 replacement blades. You can also get an extra long life battery. This battery allows you up to a half hour of fly time with a maximum speed of 40 miles an hour. Have your own personal drone, and you can get all of this for under $70. If you go to the website, wdeanshook.com, and click on the banner on the webpage, you can get from 7 to 22% off your personal drone. It's shipped as a kit. You can be up and flying your own personal drone with an HD camera within a half hour. Come to the webpage, wdeanshook.com. Click on that banner and get your discount today. wdeanshook.com.
Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. W. Dean Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
Welcome to this edition of End Time News. I'm your host, W. Dean Shook. Thank you for being here. I've got a special treat tonight. This is an interview from Sid Roth with Jonathan Cahn. In case you don't know who Jonathan Cahn is, he's the author of The Harbinger. Now, some of you have heard about The Harbinger. Some of you may even have read The Harbinger. This is an interview you cannot miss. This is truly amazing. So I've loaded it up. I'm going to play this interview by Sid Roth interviewing Jonathan Cahn. This is absolutely amazing. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Hang in there. You're going to love this.
GoDaddy offers everything you need to make a name for yourself on the web, from domain names and website builders to complete e-commerce solutions. We've earned our place as the world's #1 accredited domain registrar by delivering world-class products at competitive prices and support them with industry-best services delivered 24/7, 365. We're proud to serve our customers from locations around the world. Sign up now at wdeanshook.com and get your domain name as low as $5.99 a year. Sign up now at wdeanshook.com. Go, Daddy. Go, Daddy. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes. We either stand up to supporters of terrorism, or we and our allies risk losing the freedom we cherish. We must not let the jihadist government of Iran get a nuclear bomb. President Obama has had opportunity to stop them, but he's failing. Join with us and let's secure America now.
Do you think the media is biased? Maybe they're leaving something out, or there's something they're not telling you. Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. W. Dean Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
And thank you for allowing me that break. I appreciate that very much. We're going to get right into it. According to CP Politics, Oregon is one step closer to banning sexual orientation conversion therapy for gay minors. Seems the Oregon legislative advanced a bill that, if enacted, would ban sexual orientation change efforts for therapy for gay minors. Earlier this month, the Oregon House passed Bill 2307, which claims to legally ban medical professionals from engaging in SOCE therapy if a patient is under 18. A mental health care or special health professional may not engage in efforts to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity if the recipient of those efforts is under 18 years of age. This is House Bill 2307 that says in part, any state board that regulates license, descriptions, and subsection may impose any state board that regulates licensees may impose any form of discipline on a licensee under the law of the state for violating a law of this state or a rule adopted by this board. Sometimes called conversion therapy or reparative therapy, SOCE therapy seeks to change the sexual preference of a patient from homosexual to heterosexual. The therapy is controversial, with major organizations like the American Psychiatric Association, who's opposed to the practice. HB 2307 has drawn the concern of equality and justice for all, an ex-gay organization that supports the legalization of voluntary SOCE therapy for minors and adults. In an email sent out Thursday, Chris Doyle of EAJFA described the support particularly unconscionable, since minors often struggle with same-sex attraction as a result of rape or molestation by pedophiles. To propagate their lies, gay activists have made outrageous claims that this therapy involves electroshock and other forms of aversive methods, but they have yet to offer any proof of this. contrary to their claims, this counseling is simply talk therapy, said Doyle. Homosexual activists would rather keep these young people locked in a lifetime of hopelessness and silence than allow them to find healing from a rape or molestation. Introduced in January, and also called the Youth Mental Health Protection Act, HB 2307 garnered strong support from politicians and LGBT groups. Last month, Casey Parks of the Oregonian reported the medical professionals, clergy, and LGBT activists testified in support of this bill. And I think I've talked about that a time or two. So we'll leave that story at that. And let's get into what the Daily Beast is calling the global slaughter of Christians, and why American churches stay silent. They say Christians are being singled out and massacred from Pakistan to Syria to the Nairobi shopping center, and the silence from the U.S. pews and pulpit is deafening. Christians in the Middle East and Africa are being slaughtered, tortured, raped, kidnapped, beheaded, and forced to flee the birthplace of Christianity. One would think this horror might be consuming to pulpits and pews of American churches, but not so. The silence has been near deafening. As Egypt's Copts Christians have battled the worst attacks on the Christian minority since the 14th century, the bad news for Christians in the region keeps coming. On Sunday, Taliban suicide bombers killed at least 85 worshippers at All Saints Church, which has stood since 1883. Christians are also the target of Islamic fanatics in the attack on a shopping center in Nairobi, Kenya, this week that killed more than 70 people. The Associated Press reported that the Somali Islamic militant group Al-Shabaab, and it was confirmed by witnesses' account that the gunmen separated Muslims from other people, let the Muslims go free. The captives were asked questions about Islam. If they couldn't answer, they were shot. In Syria, Christians are under attack by Islamic rebels and fear execution if Assad's regime falls. This month, rebels overran the historic Christian town of Malula, where many of its inhabitants speak Aramaic. The AFP reported with a resident of Malula called the fiancé's cell phone and was told by a member of the Free Syrian Army that they gave him a chance to convert to Islam and he refused, so they slit his throat. Nina Shea, an international human rights lawyer and expert on religious persecution, testified in 2011 before Congress regarding the fate of Iraqi Christians, 2/3 of whom have vanished from the country. They've either been murdered or fled in fear for their lives, said Shea. In August of 2004, 5 churches were bombed in Baghdad and Mosul. On a single day in 2009, 7 churches were bombed in Baghdad. The Archbishop of Mosul was kidnapped and killed in 2008. A bus convoy of Christian students were violently assaulted. Christians have been raped, tortured, kidnapped, beheaded, and evicted from their homes. And it's no surprise that the Jews seem to understand the gravity of this situation the best. In 2011, Britain's chief rabbi, Lord Sachs, addressed Parliament, saying, "I have followed the fate of Christians in the Middle East for years. I was appalled at what's happening, surprised and distressed that it's not more widely known." It was Martin Luther King who said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." He said, "That's why I felt I couldn't be silent today." Wolf has complained loudly at the State Department's lack of attention to religious persecution. But is anybody listening? No. Yet so many Western Christians are silent. In January, Representative Frank Wolf penned a letter to 300 Catholic and Protestant leaders complaining about their lack of engagement. "Can you, as a leader in the church, help?" he wrote. "Are you pained by the accounts of this persecution? Will you use your sphere of influence to raise the profile in this issue, be it through a sermon or writing or media interview?" Well, so far the takers have been few, and it seems within 2 years Christians may be completely purged from the Middle East as ISIS gains ground, despite the world's efforts to hold them back. And I think this brings up a good question. These Christians in the Middle East, staring death in the face, told convert or die, they choose not to convert. They choose death. How many Christians in America could stand before a Muslim holding an AK-47 or a large knife and say, convert or die right now? What would you do? Well, I have a piece written here by Jesse Patterson of WND, who has a quote from Patrick Henry that says, "The war has actually begun. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand here idle? Truth is, an unholy war has been declared against you, Christians, and it's being waged right now around the world. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The wake-up call should have been September 11th. Tragically, America and the West hit the snooze button and rolled over. Islamists have been waging an open, brutal war of extermination, particularly against Christians, ever since. Surely you've heard about this. What do you do when you hear about it? Ignore it? Tell yourself there's nothing you can do about it? Say that it's prophesied, so let it play out? Meanwhile, more of you Christian brothers and sisters are being slaughtered. ISIS is attacking historic Christian towns. They're destroying churches and artifacts in Iraq and Syria. More than 125,000 Christian men, women, and children have been forced from their homes over the last 10 months in Iraq. There were 1.9 million Christians in the country. Today, there's less than 150,000. Christian children today are being raped, put out into the slave market in Muslim countries. ISIS leader Abu al-Baghdadi has even vowed to lead the Muslim conquest of Rome, headquarters of the Catholic Church. You know, the original Crusades were a protective action against the Islamic conquest of the Holy Land. Have today's Christians become so beaten down that even self-preservation is not sufficient motivation to act? Do you think it's time for Christians to get serious about your faith and unite against this ever-growing peril? The silence from the U.S. government is shameful. Barack Obama has long ago chosen his sides. His quick condemnation of any alleged persecution of Muslims and utter silence as Christians are slaughtered like animals tell us what we need to know. His outrageous sellout of Israel both before and after the recent election should have waken up every Jewish and Christian person in the world. Truth is, he says we as Christians need to adjust to a new reality. Our leaders will not save us. A new era of self-reliance must begin, and it must start now. With the exception of a handful of Republicans, our House and Senate are AWOL in this war. Almost none of them have the spine to even attempt to stop this anti-Christian, anti-Jewish occupation of the White House. Never mind that our forefathers pledged their lives, their fortune, their sacred honor for their country. This new breed is afraid they'll be called racist, or they'll lose some perks, or maybe even some committee positions. But there's a few trying to ease the plight of persecuted Christians. Chris Smith has sponsored the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act of 2015. This is H.R. 1150. Passages of this act will improve our ability to advance religious freedom globally through enhanced diplomacy, training, counterterrorism, foreign assistance efforts, and allow stronger and faster responses to religious freedom violations worldwide. We should all contact our elected officials and encourage them to support this act. He said this is a good first step. But the best way to change is for Christians and Jews and every person of conscience in the world to get directly involved. He said, for starters, we need to understand that Islamists want to make us disappear from the earth. Ignoring or denying this fact will only aggravate the problem. Second, we need to realize that Obama will never act. This is Holy Week for Christians. They observe Palm Sunday and the return of Christ back to Jerusalem before his crucifixion and resurrection. He said we need to unite in prayer, in conversation, and in physical action to help our fellow Christians around the world. Not just for the body is one and has many members, and all of the members of the body, though many, are one body, so is with Christ in 1 Corinthians. Matthew Van Dyke, son of Liberty International, is a good example of what we need to do. He's been featured on Fox News and on the Glenn Beck Network. And he's funding a project to bring U.S. veterans to Iraq to advise and train Christians to fight ISIS. He's doing this with his own money, and he's not receiving any help from the government or the UN. We need more committed Christians like Van Dyke, willing to get involved. We're engaging in a spiritual and a physical battle of good versus evil. America needs to look beyond our own borders and help our Christian brothers and sisters being persecuted in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere. He said, I'm not calling on American Christians and others of conscience to go and join the physical fight, but perhaps help financially, volunteer in some other capacity, encourage friends to do the same. We cannot sit idle and allow Islamic fanatics and this cowardly politicians who enable them to continue massacring Christians. It's our God-given duty to respond to this. And if you are who and what you say you are as a Christian, and not Christian in name only, then this is going to motivate you. And what should motivate you even more is the Islamic calls saying that Islam is describing the end times as now. They say the Mahdi is set to return in 2016, followed by Jesus. Now, it's not only evangelical Christians who are sensing that something has changed in the world, that we may be entering these very last days. Muslims are also eagerly awaiting their Messiah. The latest evidence of this messianic fervor, a mainstream Sunni Muslim website has declared that the Islamic Messiah, called the Mahdi, will appear this year or in 2016, and that the Muslim Jesus will return in 2022 to conquer the world for Islam. Now, these estimates were derived from the latest research into numerical analysis of the Quran, the Hadith, Arabic words, and historic events according to DiscoveringIslam.com. The website reports, the messenger of Allah informed the companions of everything that would occur until the day of resurrection. It's based on our numerical analysis of the Quran and the Hadith. The official beginning of the end of time and the coming of the Imam Mahdi will most likely be in 2015 or 2016, and Jesus Christ will come down from heaven to earth in 2022, if Allah is willing. It went on to declare that Quran and Bible have end-time narratives that are similar, but they're opposite. Here's the truth. The Bible's Antichrist, for instance, resembles Imam's Messiah. Now, the Quran teaches that Jesus returns to earth, but for a very different reason. He comes to break the cross and convert the world's Christians to Islam. In Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they all warn of false prophets. The Bible says in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 that false teachers and false prophets would come and arise in the last days to deceive many. I would say Muhammad is one of these false prophets. My opinion. This false prophet's religion must be taken seriously because 1.4 billion people believe in these teachings, which are very apocalyptic, and they're getting worse. In fact, it's impossible to understand what inspires and motivates Islamic radicals like ISIS or Al-Qaeda if you aren't familiar with their eschatology. But it's not just the radicals who believe Islamic teachings about the apocalypse. A lot of people claim that Muslims who believe these things are a tiny minority of radicals. Fact is, mainstream Muslims now believe that these are the last days now. Many Muslims across the globe see these unfolding events in Syria and Iraq as proof that the prophetic traditions of Islam are coming to pass and will lead to the return of the Muslim Jesus and the Muslim Mahdi. Now, WND reported last October, an influential Turkish Muslim media personality and prophetic author, Adnan Akhtar, said he expects the Mahdi to appear in Istanbul. Akhtar said the Mahdi will communicate with spirit beings called the Djinn, who will help Muslims prevail throughout the world. ISIS expects a major battle to occur near the Syrian city of Dabiq between the soldiers of Allah and the Romans, who are seen as the leaders of the infidel Western powers fighting alongside apostate Muslims. Some analysts have said the ISIS would be trying to hasten the battle by goading the U.S. into putting boots on the ground in Syria. According to the Islamic view of the soldiers of Allah, will win this battle, ushering in a period marked by the destruction of the Jewish state of Israel in the dominance of Muslims globally. And even if none of these things are true, there's power in prophecy. And the sense of divine endorsement empowers these Muslims, which may have horrific consequences in the days ahead. When Christians think about Jesus' warning of the rise of false prophets in the last days, a lot of times we think about false voices in the church. And no doubt we have plenty of preachers who are shouting peace and security, all is well, thrive and prosper, God will make you rich. But rarely do Christians think of the false prophecies of Islam that are misleading a large segment of mankind, not just Muslims. There was a filmmaker named Joel Rosenberg who said the greatest danger to the world is not merely radical Islam, but apocalyptic Islam. In Tehran, our own president has just agreed to allow the single most apocalyptic regime in the earth to attain nuclear weapons. Never before has the term existential threat been so real. Truly, the world is entering into uncharted territory. Now is the time for people to start using some common sense. Now, I know that sounds a little funny because in today's world, common sense is not common. Let me tell you this. In late 2014, an interview with a Christian radio host named Reggie Stearns said he changed the focus of his ministry after 9/11 attacks. He says, Islam represents a major challenge to Christianity, quite possibly the challenge of the age, and most Christian leaders are unprepared for this challenge. He said, I'm really focused on trying to educate the Christian church. Even in nations where Muslims are a majority, the Christian leaders, the pastors, they often don't know how to relate to the issues of Islam. They don't know how to train their people to respond to Islam and to meet the challenge courageously, intelligently, and to give it at the right time. You know, it's really Shiite Islam that's making the most noise about this. I'm going to take a couple minutes here and just go briefly between what Christianity says about the end times and what Islam says about the end times. There may be a chance here that the antichrist will end up being Muslim. I'm going to put this information out there and you decide for yourself. In Shiite Islam, there have been 12 imams. This is a spiritual leader, according to them, appointed by Allah. This began with Imam Ali, cousin to Muhammad, who claimed prophetic succession after Muhammad's death around AD 868. The 12th imam, or Muhammad Mahdi, was born to the 11th imam because his father was under intense persecution. The Mahdi was sent into hiding. About the age of 6, when his father was killed, he came out of hiding but then disappeared again. It's said that this Mahdi has been hiding in caves ever since and will supernaturally return just before the day of judgment to eradicate all tyranny and oppression, bringing harmony and peace to the earth. He's the savior of the world in Shiite theology. According to some Shiites, the Imam Mahdi will combine the dignity of Moses, the grace of Jesus, and the patience of Job in one perfect person. Now, I find this very interesting, that they can believe their Mahdi can be a combination of 3 different natures in one spiritual leader, but say that the God of Christianity, being the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, has to be 3 gods. That somehow, this Islamic leader, being 3, can do something that God can't, which is being 3 in 1. And it is only Islam's claim that they're the only one that worships a single God, and claim that Christians are worshiping 3. The predictions about the 12th Imam are very similar to the Bible prophecies of the end times. According to Islamic prophecy, the Mahdi's return will be preceded by a number of events during 3 years of horrendous world chaos, and he can only come back in complete world chaos. He'll rule over the Arabs and the world for 7 years. His appearance will be accompanied by 2 resurrections, one of the wicked and one of the righteous. Now, according to Shiite teachings, Jesus will accept the Mahdi's leadership, and the 2 great branches of Abraham's family will be reunited forever. Now, the idea of the world being in the end times started with former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who's a deeply committed Shiite. He claims he is to personally prepare the world for the coming Mahdi. He said in order for the world to be saved, it must be in a state of chaos and subjugation. Ahmadinejad feels he was directed by Allah to pave the way for that. He's repeatedly made statements about destroying the enemies of Islam. Ahmadinejad and his cabinet had supposedly signed a contract with al-Mahdi in which they pledged themselves to his work. And when asked directly by ABC reporter Ann Curry in September of 2009 about this apocalyptic statement, Ahmadinejad said, "Imam will come with logic, with culture and science. He will come so that there is no more war, no more enmity or hatred, no more conflict. He will call on everyone to enter into a brotherly love. Of course, he will return with Jesus Christ. The two will come back together. Working together, they will fill the world with love." Now, because he made that statement, apparently Ahmadinejad doesn't know that Christ is not his name. The correct use of this term would be the Christ, Jesus, because the word Christ is a translation of the word Christo, meaning Messiah. It's what he is. It's not his surname. So when he calls Jesus Christ, he's calling Jesus Messiah. So what does this all have to do with the Antichrist? Well, according to Revelation 6:2 and Daniel 9:27, the Antichrist will pose as a man of peace, ready to set the world right. And it's easy to see how the Antichrist promising a false peace would be welcomed by a world in chaos with this Muslim caliphate, the rise of ISIS, and a possible Middle East nuclear arms race. This would be a world hungry for security. Some may seem as the Mahdi, others may seem as the Messiah. In fact, Jesus warned that the Antichrist would mimic the true Messiah and be accepted by those who rejected Christ. And there's a few other parallels between the Bible and the Shiite theology that we need to look at. First, the Bible says the tribulation will last for 7 years. Islam claims the 12th Imam will rule the world for the same amount of time. Second, Muslims anticipate 3 years of chaos before the revealing of the 12th Imam. The Bible speaks of 3.5 years of tribulation before the Antichrist reveals his true nature by desecrating the Jewish temple. Third, the Bible describes Antichrist as a deceiver who claims to bring peace, but who actually brings widespread war. The expectation of the 12th Imam is that he will bring peace through massive war with the rest of the world. So will the Antichrist be a Muslim? Well, we won't know until it happens. Are there connections between Islamic eschatology and Christian eschatology? There certainly seems to be a direct correlation, but I'll say this. They seem like reading the description of a great battle, first from the perspective of a loser that's trying to save face, and then from the perspective of the winner. Of course, prophecies of the 12th Imam should not be considered equal to Bible prophecy, because the Bible is much more detailed. It gives more information. But it is possible to interpret some of the elements of Islamic eschatology in a way that agrees with Daniel and Revelation. But I don't think that lends any credence to the rest of Shiite theology. 1 John chapter 4 says, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirit to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." Well, we live in a time that's full of false prophets. My advice is, if the signs of the times are important to you, if you see things changing for the worst very quickly, and you're one that's trying to keep up, then stay right here on End Time News. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget, you can download the mobile app for iPhone or Android, available on Google Play or at the App Store. You can email me at contact@wdeanshook.com. Twitter is WDeanShook. Facebook is WDeanShook. And as usual, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, I'll be back with more truth in the news. Thank you.
You can get these full stories and more at WDeanshook.com. That's WDeanshook.com.